This next guest on Realm Travel is an incredibly talented up-and-coming YouTuber in this UFO space. What I really respect about him is that he actually tries to dive deep into the research and vast materials from credible sources that we do have and attempts to draw some sort of conclusions from it, so we can deepen our understanding of this wild phenomenon wherever it may lead. Together, we engage in some wild speculation, but also keep our leashes just tight enough. I really hope you enjoy the conversation that we had together as much as I did. My name is JP, and please welcome Jason Samosa to this episode of Realm Travel. Did you know that yanking on a dog's leash can actually be quite painful for the dog's throat? And for strong dogs that like to pull on the leash all the time, that can make walking unpleasant for both of you. Luckily, the sponsor of this video, Compadre, is here to make sure you love every walk. Compadre has developed the patented no-pull solution, a humane harness and leash system to help train against pulling and lunging behaviors. Compadre believes that you don't have to hurt a dog or break their beautiful spirit in order to get them to be good citizens on a leash. The no-pull solution uses gentle corrections around the strongest parts of a dog's anatomy, the chest, which means that you can guide and train your dog without painful pinch collars, e-collars, or choke chains. This system helps you to gain your dog's attention and lead them to walk calmly beside you. Now with Compadre's no-pull solution, both dogs and humans have a clear line of communication. No more pulling, love every walk. So head over to compadre.com to check this out for yourself. That's www.compadre.com. And if you use promo code JPT2025, you can get 10% off of your order. Thank you, Compadre, for sponsoring this video. Now back to the show. All right, we've got a fellow traveler here, Jason Samosa. Delicious name, by the way. I'm really excited to talk with you. I have to say, man, I think there's this delicate dance you have to do, or one has to do, when dealing with controversial topics whose implications are so huge, but we're not certain. You have to like present a compelling argument. You have to make a high quality video that people aren't going to immediately click away when they see it. But you also have to be careful not to present a sensationalist one. And I think you walk that dance really well. You walk that line really well because you present really compelling evidence in a really conscientious way. I think you ask the right questions, but you say yourself, like, you don't know, you're not certain. And I think that makes you credible. So I really like your channel, man.
Thanks, appreciate it. Well, first, it's great to be here, and thank you for having me on. And I really appreciate what you're saying. You know, as you were saying it, I was just thinking maybe one of the reasons that I'm in that ballpark is because I haven't had an experience, right? Like, I think if I'd had like a series of really intense experiences, I'd probably focus on those because that would have shaped my subjective reality. Without having had those, the only phenomena that I've got to engage with is the bizarre behavior of the United States government. And, you know, that's something that everyone can see. I think it's probably a bit more difficult if you're trying to explain subjective stuff, which is still legitimate. So maybe it's just a product of the fact that all I've got is documents and strange testimony.
But that's all we have. Like, if you're going to take this seriously and you're going to do what the skeptics claim nobody ever does and look at the evidence, then we have to look at what we have, and we have these alleged insiders, and you work off of Jacques Vallée's notes, you work off of the people who have been pushing this disclosure movement forward in the last, I guess almost 10 years now. And I think you made a really good point there. It's like the most anomalous behavior that's easily provable is the U.S. government, and the people in Congress made such a great point. It's like, if there's nothing to it, why not share all of the data? I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's that is a big thing. Whenever I'm speaking to people about this topic, I generally don't start with trying to explain what's out there because we don't know. But there is just a mystery happening right now. Why has the government, well, the government's a big term, right? But a group of people inside the government been systematically pushing this topic for, 2013, maybe 2011 is kind of when it started. And that, we have to account for that, whether or not aliens are real or UFOs is ours or theirs or whatever. Like, that is incredibly strange. And it's something that it just keeps my brain ticking around. So it's a real passion.
Yeah, same here. And to be honest, even if, like, for whatever reason, if these objects, for lack of a better term, if there's some sort of meteorological phenomenon, if it's simply a hallucination, which I don't think it is, but even if it was, or if it's some animal we haven't discovered, I still want to know. But I mean, this brings me to my first sort of topic I want to discuss with you, because as our modern era of disclosure moves along, the bandwidth of our understanding expands. And to me, that expansion means, what if not all of this is extraterrestrial? What if this is a broader thing? And that's where we get to, like, to me, that brings me immediately back to TTSA and Tom DeLonge. And I think, I forget which one of your videos you address this on. I think it's several, but I think that's a really good place to start. Do you think, in your opinion, how much of that was a limited hangout, and how much of that was people genuinely trying to push disclosure through the media and through popular characters? Yeah.
I think this is where I started my fascination, because this whole thing, for those of you, I'm assuming most people know, but effectively in 2016, Tom DeLonge comes out, starts saying, I'm speaking with all of these people from the government. They're the people who run the UFO thing. I found them. They're telling me this stuff. It's all going to come out. He sounded crazy. And it was when the WikiLeaks emails came out in 2016, the Podesta emails. You can still go and see them on WikiLeaks. I think they're back online now. And you can just search Tom DeLonge UFO, and there's like 40 emails back and forth, including senior people, General Neil McCaslin, General Mike Carey, and Robert Weiss from the Skunk Works. And I think it's a great place to start, because, like we were saying a moment ago, there is an anomalous phenomenon happening in the government. And that's one place where you can literally lift up a thing you were never supposed to see. You were never supposed to see these communications, but they're there showing you there was a conversation between these were 2-star generals from the Air Force, and the guy who ran Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works about UFOs with a rock star. Why? So your question is great, and it's the question I asked. And what I've realized is, now, having looked at this for like 3 years, I've looked at that topic as deeply as I can. I think it's a mix, and I know it's not a satisfying answer, but here's what I understand. DeLonge was passionate about this stuff going back into the 2000s. He was first on Coast to Coast AM in 2011, I think December of that year. And he was already saying a lot of the same stuff that he would say later on. Okay, so this tells us he already had got information from Stephen Greer, from different books. He formed an interesting opinion about this. He started to form an artistic project called To the Stars, which is like a multimedia, through his albums, through movies, through comics, really trying to like open up this topic to young people. And then in 2015, he suddenly makes contact with these extremely senior people. And I think a few things happened here. So I think Tom's intentions were 100% true, like he genuinely wanted to get the information. And I think these people from the defense and intelligence community were planning what's called a confirmation, right? They were like, it's not disclosure, it's confirmation, which I think is like, we're not going to reveal everything terrible we ever did. We're not going to show you all the crimes. What we're going to do is we're going to trickle out information that confirms that there is a presence and that this topic should be taken seriously, right? So it's sort of a midway thing. But somewhere in there, other stuff gets mixed in. So, the last video I made we really dug into Jacques Vallée's journals from this period because he met Tom DeLonge when this was going on. And you begin to see like all of this weird Nazi mythology stuff coming out. And don't get me wrong, like I've got a whole file of like evidence I've been collating that the Nazis did persist after World War II, and they did develop advanced technology. I don't think they mastered it, but they certainly seem to be developing disc-shaped craft. And there's testimony that the senior Nazis claimed they had help. So I'm into it. But the story that DeLonge was being told by some of his advisors was pretty out there, and it included quite direct references to a neo-Nazi presence in South America today, which is very different to let's create a big mythology and put it in cinemas to get the youth acclimatized to this huge story. That's the kind of backstory you'd want if you wanted to convince young children that the war in Venezuela is a good thing. You know, like I'm not necessarily tying those two things together, but there's a difference between historical mythology and something that has geopolitical consequences today. So that's one thing, would be these advisors mixed in some stuff that's like, oh, what does that mean? Yeah. What are you trying to achieve? The other thing I would say is there are people from To the Stars Academy, like Jim Semivan, Chris Mellon, who seem to be aware that that's going on, and they're like not so comfortable with that, but also still see the project as being legitimate and necessary. So you've got a mix. I think there are different people with different agendas who are they just want disclosure, even if it means signing up to some weird stuff.
I think that's a good point, and I think that's a responsible standpoint to take on it, because this whole subject is fraught with disinformation, probably trickled in with some truth. I mean, you encounter this over and over again, and it's this. All I can really say is a sense, because I haven't seen the actual evidence to say whether or not it's true. But you have all these whistleblowers, quote unquote whistleblowers, I mean, leading back into the 90s with like people who claim they worked at S4, and here's the 4 different types of craft. I mean, I'm not even talking about Bob Lazar. I'm talking about like people before that who like sat down with I forget who the author was, but he wrote a bunch of different UFO books and crash retrieval books. And this guy was like, this one has high. Which one?
Leonard Stringfield?
No, not that guy. He wrote the book UFO Crash, UFO China, like that whole series of books. I'll find the name and I'll put his picture up in the podcast to make up for my misremembering. But you know, it's like, and it makes me wonder, like, some of this has got to be fake. I mean, there's like the security in these programs has got to be insane. And then going back to like what James Lukatsky has said, who is, you know, the head of OSAP, you know, that every program has a counterintelligence officer, you know, and so it's almost impossible to find out. But just going back to TTSA, it's like, I think no matter what the intentions were behind TTSA and these ghostly advisors, what has happened, the product is, I think, good. The end product is that mainstream, we have very serious people coming forward now with the age of disclosure, all of these like government folks who say like these objects are real. We don't know what they are. That I'm not so sure about. And they're a national security threat. The question is like, were these like figures battling with other figures with different agendas, like you said? And here's a weird question in the middle of my rambling is, you know, Lou Elizondo brings up this question is like, why now? Everyone wants to know why now. I want to ask, do you think that part of the reason why now is because somewhere somebody has had some success with derivative technology and now they feel safe discussing it? Or do you think, like, what do you think there?
I love this question. I love it. You know, the why now question, I made a whole video about it where I was just like And I think I had like 20 different theories. So this could be a long answer, but let me actually trace it back to something else. I used to work in sales, and if you're selling big deals to an organization, they don't, you can't just pressure them into it, right? Like if I'm trying to sell you an encyclopedia, I could use like emotional tactics and all these things to try and convince you to buy it, and how it's this source of knowledge and you're going to become this elevated person, and you might just pay there and then. If you're trying to sell, I don't know, $500,000 software deal to a large organization, you can't just force them to do it. They're not going to change their mind. What you do in the world of sales is you look for something called a compelling event, and a compelling event is something that organization is going to face that they simply can't get away from. In my experience, it was things like they might be audited. And when that audit happens, they're not going to be able to do it because they don't have visibility of the things that the auditors are asking for. So that's happening in September of next year. They have to buy a product now to solve that. That would be a compelling event. Or, I don't know, they're going to go through a merger and they're not prepared for the technical stuff that's going to happen then. So these sorts of things are not things that you control, but they're like external events that you simply have to be prepared for. And that's the only way to move extremely large organizations. Pressure won't work. I think the same logic applies to UFO disclosure. And this might be me stepping way outside of my wheelhouse here, but I just think that the only thing that's going to create this movement is if there's something impending, and it doesn't have to be an asteroid or a spaceship coming or whatever. It could be China is about to crack this technology and we're going to have huge questions, or I don't know, that there's some sort of pivotal moment coming where certain things are going to happen. For me, that is the best explanation, is something external. It's not pressure from citizens or a group. But the answer to that, what that might be, is muddied, and I suspect intentionally. I suspect there's been all sorts of random stuff thrown out about 2027 to potentially acclimatize us to the idea gradually. 3i Atlas has done a tremendous job of this, by the way. Like, whatever that is, it's done a phenomenal job of getting this idea of what could happen into the media. So there's probably an acclimatization thing going on, and behind it all, I don't know what it could be. But yeah, I like the way you asked the question. Like, were you sort of implying that maybe China could be on the brink of reverse engineering something, or?
Well, I think I could be one avenue, but I have so many different things I want to cover here based on your answer. This is so fascinating because as you were speaking, a thought came into my mind. It was actually an interview with Matthew McConaughey, and he talked about, I like what you said about sales, and just made me think about this. He likes to describe his favorite type of director. His favorite type of director is someone who listens to him, takes in his points of view. Like, hey, Mr. Director, I think that my character should, have a twitch in his left eye. And every once in a while, he's going to need to put an eye drop in that eye. And the director's like, yeah. And maybe he needs to have really thick glasses. And he takes Matthew McConaughey's point of view and molds it, uses his passion and molds that passion closer to his original kind of view. And, it seems like Tom DeLonge, from one of the quotes you showed in your video, he's like, I had all these theories and I went into this group of people and I said, this is how I see it. And they said, okay. And, if it would make sense to me, we're engaging in wild speculation, by the way. I just want to put this out there.
You have no other choice, right? No one's telling us.
Yeah. So until then, here's my wild speculation. You can't show your hand to China. At least maybe back then, because now in the age of disclosure, they mention China so many times. But the idea of like letting a popular figure lead the charge and like influence young people, that alone was good for them, because maybe the whole thing was about China. Let's just say the whole thing was about China, but you don't want to show your hand to China. Like, China, we know what you're doing. We have satellite footage. We know you have 5 craft. We're trying to figure out more about this. But if we say that out loud, that could be an issue for them. But maybe instead, there's this 2026, 2027 threat that we put out there so that there's this urgency, but it's more complicated than that. I could see that being the case, but I'm reluctant to completely dismiss 2026, 2027 because of Chris Bledsoe and just how genuine he seems. But again, he's another guy who's got people whispering in his ears at all times. So, but I think this is the type of thinking you have to engage in, because you can't just take everything in wholesale, but you also, but you know what I mean. I'm losing my train of thought here, but please go ahead.
On the Bledsoe thing, I think I'll tell you where I've got to with that, because I think you're right. Like what makes Bledsoe so tantalizing is it's not that you listen to what he says and you're like, this must be true. It's that you know from like 3 or 4 different sources all these senior people who were going to him, like, you know, not just from US intelligence agencies, multiple of them, but even from the UK, they had like MOD people going. That tells you that word got out and it was taken seriously. Something about what was going on was credible to these incredibly busy people. But on the actual testimony thing, gosh, I don't know if I was reading Vallée or I was listening to Diana Pasulka, but I was just reminded of how many of these cases of the lady or even other phenomenon speaking to people actually just is like apocalyptic BS. As in, like we look, don't get me wrong, the world is, for all intents and purposes, on a train track towards an apocalypse right now, for sure. But like the warnings are always like urgent, pressing, you must do A, B, and C, but very little comes of them. Like, you know, it's always, there's always these warnings. And I have decided now to reinterpret that as like, I'm not going to worry about 26, 27, because in my mind, it's either another one of those warnings, which we have precedent for, or it's part of a programming, you know, to acclimatize us to these kinds of things. So, yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to add that in about Bledsoe. That's where I'm at with it.
Yeah. That one's really intriguing because, at least from my knowledge, and I'm in the middle of UFO of God right now, and I've listened to his several of his interviews. It's absolutely wild. But yeah, I think that 2026, 2027 thing came from one of his experiences. So I think he probably believes that something could happen, and according to him, some things have happened that line up with his predictions. But I think for me, it's really just like a matter of when it happens, it happens. I'm not gonna look forward or be afraid. I'm just simply gonna take in all the information skeptically, open-minded, as the open-minded skeptic.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something about, I think Chris Bledsoe, Diane Pasulka is a really good dovetail into the next topic, because this connection that one can get in their mind by reading people like Diana Pasulka, by reading people like Jacques Vallée, and I would argue by reading James Lukatsky, Colin Kelleher, and watching the podcast that they do about OSAP with the Weaponized podcast. There seems to be these elements that follow the UFO phenomenon. For example, as I'm sure you know, OSAP program investigated all these UFO sightings, and if they found that they just pushed a little bit further, if they interviewed people in the area, there was a litany of different sightings of shadow beings, ghost kind of behavior, and in some cases like werewolf, like wolfman types of things, which sounds nuts, but there's a lot of stories about that. And so it just brings up the question again, is part of the reason why they're so reluctant to give you this because there is just too much to understand at once. You can't just dump it all on like, yeah, we're all alien hybrids and there's werewolves and there's fairies. Like if all of that is true, I don't know if it is, but that would make sense. But I mean, what's your opinion about the whole like this whole wider spectrum of phenomenon? I mean, you've looked probably at these older texts than I have. I've seen the books and your videos that you've stacked up next to you, and I'm interested in your point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is for us. It's quite fun, to see all these connections. It's sort of exciting. But you're right that if some of this is true, like how do you explain this to people? I mean, it's just such an they call it like ontological shock. My view has evolved from. I don't know that I ever felt deeply about the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I think from day one I was reading Vallée when I really got into this. But now I feel like I understand Vallée better. And it's interesting because let's think about his hypothesis about the control system. This idea that a lot of the phenomena that we encounter all follow a similar pattern through human history, and that it kind of acclimatizes itself based on the viewer. That's the system which would do this must be huge, complex, and someone must have made it. So in that scenario, you might say that the bulk of the phenomena isn't extraterrestrial, but it might be the case that the actual system was created by something from another planet or solar system. So you can blend the hypotheses in that way. I certainly do think that it's probably a bit more complicated than just that. There's, and I'm cautious about using ancient texts. Like I really enjoy seeing the connections between them, but some of them, it's easy to get overexcited about them because, like if you look at Genesis 6, for example, the Nephilim, the sons of God, really amazing. But when was that written? Well, Genesis was revised multiple times. There's a thing called the documentary hypothesis, which postulates that there were 4 different people writing, rewriting, editing Genesis throughout its lifetime. So, how old is Genesis 6 and what's it referring to? We don't know. So I'm cautious about that. But it is really interesting to see the comparative connections between all of these texts and stories. And there are consistencies. There is a consistent story about a cataclysm that happened, usually connected to some weird genetic stuff that happened before, and the interminglings of like something from heaven and something from earth came together to make something weird, and that wasn't good, so there was a response. And there's often groups and factions of gods, which I think coming from a Judeo-Christian world, we lose that. A lot of the way that Christianity is taught doesn't talk about angels and demons that much. It's all about your relationship to God. It's very myopic, whereas like most other mythologies, they view that there is no like the God. Usually it's just gods, plural. There might be a leader, and that changes things because if you've got warring gods and there's groups of them, what are these things? Where do they come from? It's a lot more rich in terms of how you can understand it. So I look at that. I look at that with great interest. I look at phenomena throughout history as legitimate, and I think the control system hypothesis definitely seems very interesting. But I just don't know. I certainly think the extraterrestrial hypothesis isn't sophisticated enough to deal with the data. No way. We're looking at something much more complex, and I think we're certainly looking at a struggle. And I wonder, something I think about a lot is whether you can overlay a struggle between non-human factions and whether that can be somewhat overlaid into our geopolitics today. I personally think that's very compelling. Don't have conclusive evidence, of course. But, when DeLonge came out, one of the things he was told, which I personally think makes sense, is think about a proxy war, right? He would always talk about Syria. He'd say, the Syrians are there, but why is the war happening? Well, Russia's recruited one faction, the West has recruited another, maybe Israel's also in there, and they're all messing with each other and not necessarily telling the Syrians what's going on or why. And I think it's a really useful way of thinking about this. So Sorry, I'm like rambling, but
No,
you can tell
definitely
my
not.
views constantly evolve every day. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is that's why I appreciate this type of line of investigation, because you just look at what you deem to be credible information and consider it. And I think that's the best way to go, instead of saying this is how it is.
Yeah.
I mean, with almost anything, anyone who's certain about something, they're very likely to be proven wrong. And I think the other issue when we talk about mythology and passages in the Bible or passages in the Quran is the further you go back into history, first of all, the more muddled the information becomes. One, for the reason you said, is these things have been edited over and over and over again. It's an ancient game of telephone. And therefore, all of the things that can be interpreted are muddied as well. And the question that I often ask myself is like, you can point back and say like, look, in all of these religions, there are, oh wow, it just started raining really hard. There are all of these gods. Like almost every religion, there are these beings that are higher, sometimes divine, and you have like these, demigods. And you can point to all of that and you can say, wow, that really reflects how we think about UFOs. But that could be just a reflection of how the human imagination imagines things. It's I have to agree with you. It's so careful, but I do think there are consistencies, like you said. You find in the Celtic religions, like through Passport to Magonia, they have all these stories of like death candles. And if you look at the description of a death candle, it's like straight out of the OSAP program or the ATIP program, whichever one is real, where it's like, yeah, there are these blue orbs and green orbs, or even the green fireball study, right? Like, so it's like, okay, I can see that, but this is where we get into the really, really murky stuff, because, you have the levels of confirmation as we go through disclosure. It seems like we've started out with, okay, we have some confirmation that there are objects that are non-human, or at least we can't control. The next thing from that would be some of those objects have occupants that are not human. The next thing from that would be those occupants sometimes take people. All right. I'm just going off of what the Invisible College has looked at versus what is being acknowledged. Then the next thing from that, which you have focused on, is that not only do they take people, but they make new beings out of this, right? And that's the specific thing that I find to be the most akin to ancient texts, is there's always some divine being or otherwise, right, satanic being that is interbreeding with a human. Yeah. And I think you're right. It's easy to get excited about that, but I do find the pattern really interesting. And again, I want to say that could just be a really interesting reflection of the human imagination, because we think that now with whatever this thing that brings into the question, the airships in the 1800s, that was the brink of what humans could understand. Now that we're obsessed with AI and technology, now we're seeing these craft, but I'm not certain about any of this stuff, but there's enough there to be curious, I would say.
Yeah. So the airship thing really befuddles me, because on the one hand, it feels like the perfect argument for look, that's what the human imagination can handle at that point. But it's the trajectory of how these things evolve isn't consistent. I'm pretty sure there was a saucer scene before and after that. So that the airship mystery is really weird. And I feel like we have so much to learn about what was going on there. And, on the topic of hybrids, I do think this is interesting. I do, because the information coming out of the disclosure movement and inadvertently coming out of some of these UFO hearings is kind of compelling. Like, so many people are correlating paranormal experiences with the amount of non-human or non-human genetic material that you have. Like, I found so many different authors hinting at this. And then there's that testimony in the UAP hearing from Representative Boebert. And, I'm aware that people don't trust Boebert. That's absolutely fine.
Right.
But she clearly had been told something which she felt was pressing enough that she should ask it during the UFO hearing, about a story of a hidden program where they were trying to augment human DNA with non-human DNA. And to bring it back to your thing about how you connect this to ancient texts, I've been reading a book called Exo Vaticana, which is this really dense book about.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, it's a really there are a couple of evangelical Christians trying to see how they can understand the UFO phenomenon, what's going on with the Catholic Church and the end times. And, I'm no longer a Christian, and so I don't necessarily agree with everything. But they do point out some really interesting stuff. Like, they highlight this verse from the Gospel of Matthew. And I remembered it. As soon as they said it, I was like, oh, yeah. Where Jesus says, in those last days, it'll be as in the times of Noah. Which is a really interesting thing to say, to parallel the end times to the time of Noah. Now, you could say like, oh, well, that's just referencing the fact that when Noah was building the ark, he was warning everyone. He was like, guys, huge disaster's coming. We've got to take action. So you might say that this is just Jesus saying the end times will be like that. But what they point out is that the other defining feature of that period of Noah was that the earth was full of these weird non-human hybrids that were causing absolute disaster everywhere, That was the other defining feature of that time. And it's like, well, what are we seeing now? And they point, and this book was written in 2013. They have just endless data showing the meddling that's going on with genetic material and human-animal hybrids that are being experimented on, let alone all these stories about human-alien hybrids. So I do think... I'm not saying that means that the New Testament is true or whatever, but it's just interesting that you can parallel so much of this weird stuff going on today with these religious themes. And that's maybe dangerous as well. Maybe it's not just exciting. Maybe that's a dangerous thing that we have to be careful doesn't get taken somewhere.
Yeah, there comes a certain point, because as someone who I like to think myself as a sane person, but after a certain amount of time, it requires like cognitive dissonance to ignore all of this stuff. And it's like each time I find the information that's so bizarre and so wacky, it's like a hit to my sanity. I'm like, if I talk about this, like, am I complicit in the disinformation, or is this real? But it's like so many other credible people talk about this stuff. Yeah. And here, okay, so I'd love to dovetail into another topic here, because your videos about confirmation versus disclosure raises up a really important question that has come up since the Age of Disclosure documentary has come out. And that is that there seems to be two factions that are both for disclosure. One faction is let me just pull this up so I have all the right names. One faction I'm going to call the Mass Amnesty Group. Right, that's the Age of Disclosure group. Lou Elizondo would be a poster boy of that, where it's like, here's some of what we know. These are real. That's about it. We have the right to keep our dirty little secrets to ourselves, the ones that we find important for our national security. We can give you a limited hangout, but the government doesn't have a right to keep just the base reality of this away from the public. I would say that Hal Puthoff, Eric Davis, Ross Coulthart, John Blitch are part of this group, and their sort of take on it, which I think is a convincing argument, is like, how are we going to find this information if we say that we want to punish people who have done crimes, right? In South Africa, they had the reconciliation thing where it's like, okay, all you people who have done crimes, you have amnesty, just tell us where the goods are. and you're immune. I get that. And then you have another faction, which I'm going to call for now, the Justice League, which is like Grush, UAP, Gerb, and more the public, the public that's trying to understand this, where it's like, we hear stories that people in these programs have killed people to silence them. We've heard stories that they've misappropriated tax dollars, like that they think the public doesn't deserve to know the whole truth, and that if that party had their way, the Justice League, I'll call them, then those people would go to jail, right? We would have justice for those crimes. I'm curious to know, where do you stand, if anywhere, within those two parties, and why?
Gosh, yeah. That's a really useful delineation. I don't know. I mean, like I think maybe the first place to start is to actually ask what benefits can secrecy have? And people might be like, what a terrible question to ask, but like it's actually really informative to consider that in a situation like we're in right now, where you have massive geopolitical tensions, and let's just say, in an incredibly black and white way, you've got good guys and bad guys. It's not like that at all, right? In fact, let's just say actually there are no good guys or bad guys. There's just the threat of destruction. Secrecy serves a purpose, which is like, you don't want your adversaries, who already may be motivated to cause you harm, to get access to your cutting edge information, right? So there is a rational, pragmatic reason why, if I tell the public everything, my adversaries get access to everything. Now, to be super clear, I don't think the Justice League, as you so eloquently put it, would dispute that. I think they're sensible enough to know, like, we're not going to release, like advanced technology specifications. But like that helps us to realize that secrecy is not, it's not always about hiding things from people. It's sometimes very pragmatic. I do think we need to understand our place in the universe. So I think whatever is involved in that, there is no question that we need to understand that, and it is our right to understand that. But between those two things, if you go beyond like human beings and their existential need to understand who we are and what our mission is and what's really going on, and then there's a space there between that and sensitive information which could cause harm, I don't know about that space. I'm not going to pretend I do know. The only thing I would say is the answer to the question changes dramatically based on the geopolitical stakes of what's going on. And people, including myself, like I've often thought to myself, well, maybe introducing this information will resolve the geopolitical issues, which in turn may allow us to introduce more information to the public because it'll be a safer environment. Maybe that's what they're trying to do. I don't know. One of the things I flip back and forth on, I wonder if you can resonate with this, is whether disclosure is being utilized to drive another conflict, or whether it is the antidote to another conflict. And I can't believe, because those two paths are so divergent, and yet every day I go back and forth between whether it might be one or the other. And that's frustrating. I wish I understood, what the impact of disclosure might actually be. Because like you said, Age of Disclosure was constantly referencing China geopolitics. Yeah.
Yeah, and Age of Disclosure seemed to be perpetrating this set of what they purport as a set of facts that the other faction is upset with, like the whole weaponized crew, the OSAP crew are upset that Lou Elizondo seems to keep saying, like, it's all about ATIP. It's all about ATIP. And people like UAP Gerb have said, like, that was the Blue World cover program for OSAP. And I don't know what the truth is. I'm not an insider, but the question I have about this is, so I stand with you, like, and I think we all would want to know the base reality that we're not alone. And I think the trouble that these two factions have with each other is, like, if part of that overarching truth itself can cause harm, like you touched on this, like, let's just wildly speculate and say, I'm kind of quoting, like paraphrasing here, that human alien hybrids do exist. That opens up a can of worms.
Yeah.
humans are selfish little bitches, and we like to play games with genetics and race, and like you said, like if one faction finds out that they have more DNA of a certain kind than the other, then are we opening ourselves up to another Holocaust? And you draw connections with Palestine and Israel and what's going on there. I mean, these are that stuff really keeps me up awake at night. And then the other thing I would love to get your opinion on, the whole thesis behind John Blitch. He's got a book coming out at some point, The Abduction Amnesty Knot, where it's like in his mind, the whole linchpin to the secrecy is as abductions. So in his mind, the people in charge of the legacy programs, the people in charge in general, when they recovered these crashed vehicles, inside were found human body parts as well as non-human body parts. And when you're looking at that as someone who's a soldier in the 40s, they did not talk about their trauma. I mean, my grandfather was in the Korean War. He barely ever talked about what happened to him. Yeah. They keep it locked down deep inside. If you were to see something as traumatic as that and you couldn't do anything about it, you would shut your mouth until you had some way to defend yourself against that threat. And so that brings up the question, like, have they had success? Are they able to defend the people from abductees? I don't know. I found that to be really interesting because it provides a reasonable explanation for the secrecy. But I like how you took that even a step further and went to the hybrid thing, because those, if true, the implications are massive. I mean,
I completely forgot about that one when I was answering the last question about would you disclose, right? You're right. That was one of the things when I looked into the whole hybrid. And by the way, for people who are listening, right, when I started looking into the hybrid thing, I was like, oh, this is just another topic that's just full of little UFO stories, It was like just on the list of things to look at one day. And I couldn't believe how much it's like a missing jigsaw piece in the middle of ufology. Like if you don't understand the hybrid issue and the connections it has, you won't see how different things connect. And, you're so right. When it comes to UFO secrecy, when you understand the implications of human-alien hybrids, you start to realize why they might feel they could never talk about this. Because one of the implications is that the information coming out of the Pentagon right now from all these people is, guess what? On the planet, there's a spectrum. Some people have more non-human DNA and some people have less. And the implication of that might be that not only do some people have more or less, but different people have different kinds of non-human DNA. Hey, this demographic over here, which we've wanted you to not like for a while, guess what? They also bred with this bad non-human species, thousands of years ago. And as a consequence, they have this weird relationship with them. This is part of the problem. And this, we are one step away from that conversation with the data that's coming out. And the problem with it is, how do you and I verify that, right? It's like Salem witch trials all over again. And the other issue is just, if there are human alien hybrids that have been intentionally bred so that they look just like us but have these other capabilities, and they're all over society, which, by the way, is what Bob Bigelow believes. So that's literally what Bob Bigelow has said to many people.
They're walking among us. They're all around us.
What are the implications of disclose it? Let's say they don't even disclose that. They disclose some basic stuff. But people start to figure this out. And then suddenly everyone's like, wait a second, who can I trust? Like the destabilization could be huge. And then the religious thing kicks in, right? Because then religious groups are like, oh, just like in the days of Noah, oh, look, it's this huge UFO deception. And they accelerate their agenda, which they're already accelerating, which, by the way, is not good. I'm not saying every normal Christians. I'm talking about hardcore, neoconservative,
right?
Kind of Zionist folks who have an extremely focused agenda with the Middle East and fulfilling biblical prophecy. If UFO disclosure happens, they're just going to be like, we just need to speed up what we're doing in order to help everyone. That's literally what they think. So it's kind of really dangerous, actually. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely sympathize with whoever this control group is to kick the can down the road. I mean, I get it. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's like, I think John Blitch brought this up as an analogy. It's like, you don't really want to tell your child that there's a pedophile living next door. You know what I mean? I thought that was such a good analogy. Like, Dad, he's a nice guy. Like he said he would pay me $50 to shovel his driveway. I'm quoting John Blitch now. And it's like, no, don't go over there. Like, why? Too young, like, but here's something I really want to broach with you, the subject of the occupants of the UFOs or the authors of the abductions or whatever looking like humans.
Yeah.
That opens up yet again another can of worms. I mean, I'm reading Hair of the Alien right now. I'm looking into all these different things. And I mean, you have the stories that Richard Dolan has told about different figures. I think one of them was Lieutenant Colonel Alexander had this experience where they see these like beautiful, like model looking blonde people with super blue eyes. And they're like looking at them like they don't look quite right. And then I don't know if this is true, but these stories say that in their head, they hear someone's voice. Like there was a case that Richard Dolan told where these people were in church. This woman was in church and a like super tall, blonde, supermodel couple were in the church. And then all of a sudden this woman hears in her head, like, I think that woman over there is looking at us.
I know that story.
And then they get up and leave. And here's another thing I'd love to share with you because I'm just nerding out like a motherfucker right now. But when I read the book, The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries that Jacques Vallée referenced, I didn't add this in the video, I just didn't for whatever reason. But there is a bunch of stories of people who see fairies, look like humans, and for whatever reason, they are on to these people that they're fairies. Like there's a story, actually, no, I did tell this story in the video. There's this boatman from Sligo, Ireland, and he took these two men out towards this island and they disappeared on the way. And then he saw them like months later or something. And he's like, I thought you drowned. Like, what's going on? And the guy said, do you see me? And he goes, yeah, I can see you. And he says, well, which eye can you see me with? And the guy's like, yeah, it's my right eye. And the ferryman blows in the guy's eyes and now he can't see them. And that happens over and over, like fairy dust. Or like, a woman who goes into the fairy mound and is, being made to cook buckwheat pancakes for these fairies. And she takes the fairy water and rubs it on her eyes and she can see the fairies and they go, that's not good. And they blow fairy dust or they blow in her eye and then she's blind in the eye or something like that. That's a strikingly similar type of story. But I don't even remember what my question was, but it's like, what do you think about beings looking like us? Like, what does that entail to you?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's such an interesting point. And I'm also glad, like, it seems like more people are talking about this year. It's interesting, the waves of conversation. And by the way, fair play on reading. Was that Reverend Kirk's book about fairies, the one that you referenced?
No, I will send it to you. It's called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries by W.Y. Evans Wentz. Okay. I read the full thing, dude. It is wild. Like,
awesome.
It's wild. I mean, again, it's okay. I know you're in the middle of answering, but I'll make this quick. Is like, I want to be very clear that this could be just confirmation bias because I went into that book from the viewpoint of Vallée, looking at UFOs, and I went through the book saying, does any of this sound like UFOs? So that's me projecting. But what I found objectively, and in several other books, people have pointed that out. But I'll send you the title after the podcast.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome. It's great. I just think it's also great people are reading the original source material as well. Because, it's one thing trudging through a book by Vallée and really trying to pay attention. It's another thing to then go look at the sources. So that's awesome, man. In terms of like them looking like us, sounds cheesy, but maybe we look like them. Maybe that's what's going on. I think. Yeah, I think. I don't know. I definitely, if I had to put money on it, I would say that we've been talking about, we're human alien hybrids. And so whatever was here before was taken and mixed with whatever they are. And so maybe that's what's going on. Yeah. So there's an alien race that is kind of human looking, like maybe the Nordic beings that people report so much. And perhaps we are the consequence of them interbreeding with, or doing some experiments to create a race here on Earth. And that's where you get the interesting kind of the Sumerian Anunnaki story about creating a race to work for the gods, right? I mean, who knows? Who knows? But that's my take on that. And I think it's one of the most thrilling, terrifying data points you come across as you look into this topic is the realization that some of these beings look like us, but they're clearly different to us. It's just spooky, like what a head fuck. Like that means that it's not just something coming from somewhere else. Somehow it's very likely connected to us. Because I don't think the argument some people make is, convergent evolution, the idea that a planet with similar conditions could lead to beings that look like us. And I think there's some truth to that, but for them to look so similar and then to be here, it's a bit weird.
Yeah, and it's a thing that opens up so many more questions than answers. I mean, you bring up convergent evolution, but also the way that like Peter Curry from Hair of the Alien and others, Antonio Villas-Boas, who saw a blonde being, is that a, given the fact that there's enough evidence in the literature to suggest that whatever these beings are able to mess with our psychic makeup, is that a presentation? Is that a, like a is that their, is that their porn, in the doctor's office? Is that their, there's all these questions.
With the Villas-Boas thing, I'm not going to say it's proven, but there is testimony that was a military abduction, which actually, if you there's a great video by Think Anomalous where he talks through that case, and it's really his videos are always wonderful deep dives on individual cases. And you look at the beings that are described, and you can see like all of them are humanoid. And like the beings that abducted him were like wearing these black suits with like weird masks.
Yeah.
And then he's taken on board to a craft where there's a woman. And I think, again, this is Tom DeLonge testimony, so take what you want. But he kind of hinted at this idea that they had to replicate these abductions using their own technology for some reason. This had to be done, and he didn't explain why. But I wonder with the Villas-Boas one whether that was one of those first examples where they were trying to see if they could fool someone into believing they were abducted. Maybe because they were trying to figure out whether what they were engaged with was actually a foreign country. Like, is that what maybe they still had this belief in the 50s that could this be Russia or China? And could we replicate one of these events? And if we can, what does that tell us about what it might be? But I was just saying that because it's just what's so interesting is the Villas-Boas case is on first reading a really spooky case, and then actually very quickly you can see this could be a military abduction.
I won't dismiss that. I know Dr. John Blitch was adamant that he doesn't think that's a real thing. He was really angry at Stephen Greer. Sorry?
I was just saying, really, like that's interesting. Okay.
Oh yeah, like for him, like he got angry. Like he was like, really? A head this big on a neck this thin. That's supposed to be humans. I'm not saying I support that. I find that interesting. In his case, he was never, at least, you know, and if I had such a traumatic experience, I have a hard time talking about my condition that I went through. So I get it. But in his case, so far as we know, it's been either the gray, stereotypical gray kind of beings and a being that looked like a big bug, like a big praying mantis, which that blew my mind. That's why I wanted to talk to him. Yeah. But I think in other cases where it's humans, like the Whitley Strieber thing, he said that whoever put what he claims is a implant in behind his ear were just humans, and they were just like pinning him down in his house. It doesn't sound like something a non-human. It brings up an interesting question. I got a lot of comments on one of my videos. It's like, yeah, this is all my lab. And I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of what disinformation comes out is the people in the legacy program, or whoever are the lackeys of the legacy programs, plural. They give this information to people to calm them down, say we did that, because they don't want to admit that somebody else is doing it. And this is okay. I know I'm going all over the place, but I'd love your opinion about this, because recently Marco Rubio was interviewed about the Age of Disclosure. And in the Age of Disclosure, he's like one of the most featured guests in that documentary. He was dead serious, it seemed like, about, credible people talking about crash retrieval programs and derivative technology, and, China could be ahead of this. And when he's in this interview with, I think, like Fox News, he like laughs it off, and he's like, yeah, I think, they had to make an interesting documentary, but some of these things have, personal, firsthand experience now. And, he waved it off, and it makes me wonder, one, if all of that's fake and it is just, sensationalism. And number two, if someone in the one of the legacy programs just showed him a footage of, one of the derivative technologies that he hasn't seen and said, see, look, that's all ours, just to get him to shut up. Mm-hmm. I wonder if there's some of that going on.
Yeah, I did see that Rubio interview, and Rubio is interesting because he's such a huge character in terms of his position, his authority, right? For someone that senior to have come out and said, yeah, it's real. And even if the snippets in the documentary were taken a little bit out of context, let's say they filmed and they really chose these juicy bits, let's say that happened, actually to have had Rubio not do what he did in that Fox News interview might have been problematic for the administration, given that they don't seem to have any interest in disclosing anything right now. So I think he would just have, the stakes are way too high for him to say what he really thinks. I think, and like you said, actually, JP, I think that's also legit. Let's say he was thinking of continuing the same thing from the documentary. There's probably quite a few people around him who are like, no, that's not the plan. So who knows what they might have shown him. On the My Labs thing, firstly, I think it's just really important to say, because I have looked into this a little bit, and I do think that this is My Labs are a real thing. But I've never had an experience or traumatic experience involving non-human intelligence bit where I've been abducted, right? So I am a sideline armchair ufologist. People might even laugh that I use that term because maybe can't even call myself that. So for the likes of John Blitch or anyone else who's had an experience, I am in no way firstly saying that their experiences aren't real. I believe this phenomenon is real, but I just think there's a lot of evidence that there's also other stuff going on. And I think also one of the things I explored in my video about this was the brain is already so good at deception, the way and pareidolia is such a good example of this. We see faces where there aren't faces. I'll never forget when I was 19 years old and I was traveling in India, and I decided to go for a hike through the jungle at midnight to try and find a place to watch the sunrise. It was a place called Sunrise Point. I was walking through this basically like forest, wild area with no torch, just sort of stumbling from place to place, finding where I was going. Such a crazy thing to do. I should never have done it. Man, did I think I was seeing faces everywhere? Yeah, I did. Because, I was on edge and there are these sort of like shapes and things. The brain does that because the brain's always looking for problems. It's always looking for threats. The brain is designed to reinterpret what's going on around it in certain shapes and forms. Like MK Ultra didn't even start in the US. It was a carry-on from Artichoke Bluebird, which was a carry-on from Nazi experiments. This is like 100 years old. And I think there is zero doubt that they've figured out ways to tap into that function of the brain, which deceives even us without anyone having to do anything. So you don't need to build an anti-gravity craft. You don't need, I'm not saying you don't need to, but my speculation is you don't need that. You don't need all the equipment. Actually, you can start by just using low frequency and different types of waves with the brain to trigger different states, whether that's putting someone to sleep, making them see things, waking them up, removing memories. It seems from various bits of literature that just using waves is a good way to start triggering those things. Then you introduce the likelihood that we do have anti-gravity craft and we have sophisticated prosthetics and all of this and just costumes and outfits and all of this. I certainly think they'll have tried it. I wonder whether they might have succeeded, I think it's interesting and I think we've got to keep it on the table.
Yeah. I think that's a responsible way to do that, especially if you think about Sirhan. And if what he says is true, the guy who shot RFK,
what did he say?
He said like,
yeah,
he basically, like, the way he describes it, and I have to caveat this, but it's been a while since I've watched him, but every time he was interviewed, he was like, I was at this thing and I just found myself with the gun, and he describes it. I don't want to overly butcher what he said because he's a human being. No matter what he did, but the way he describes it is as if he was compelled to do it by another force. And there's, you're from the UK. Are you familiar with the magician Darren Brown?
Yeah. Dude, he's amazing.
He's got this episode. I remember watching this as a kid where he was like, had this theory, like, a proposal. Can we get a person to do whatever we want, including killing somebody with hypnosis, with brainwashing? And he took a sample of people, and it was I think it was several episodes where he was slowly trying to figure out which one would be the right person to do this with. And he found someone that was very easily hypnotized, very easily influenced. And long story short, they had this whole thing staged where Stephen Fry was doing a talk in a theater. And this guy, they got him to be hypnotized, pick up a gun, and point it somewhere and shoot it. It's a fake gun, obviously, but you see the guy, he's in the audience, and in the middle of the show, there's some sort of they developed a trigger for this hypnosis to begin. The trigger is set off. This guy stands up in the audience with a blank expression on his face, grabs a gun, points it at Stephen Fry, and clicks, puts it down, sits back down. And it's like, if that's authentic, if you can do that with a human, it brings up questions. Can you take that a step further? Can you simulate an abduction? And again, I want to be careful because this is another thing John Blitch was really upset about, because there is people from research from serious people that said they could simulate an abduction experience. And his whole thing is like, that is completely immoral to simulate a horrific traumatic experience. He's like, that's akin to you simulating rape to study rape.
Yeah.
And I mean, it doesn't discount that people have tried to do it, but it definitely does say that it's wrong. But you touched on something, and I know you have to go soon, so we can make this the last sort of topic here. But we're kind of getting onto the border of screen memories. These abductees, contact experiencers, if you will, a lot of them report like memories that a barn owl was outside my window at night, or a deer with big black eyes. There was one, I believe it's in Passport to the Cosmos, where this person, it was like they had a dream between reality dream state thing where this owl was coming down from the sky, and it was this beautiful thing, and it turned into a Celtic god that this person recognized, and is slowly realized that this wasn't really what was going on. And then this god turned into an alien, and by that time, this person was being messed with, operated on, and they felt betrayed. And I'd love to know, one, what your opinion on screen memories is, and two, if you've seen the new trailer for the Disclosure Day, Steven Spielberg's new film, because there's shots interspliced of a little girl in her bedroom, and there's a deer who comes next to her bed with a little red cardinal on the antler. And then the next shot is the girl, the deer, and the cardinal walking on a snowy road to a big fairy tale house with big lights on in it. And it's like, is that a screen memory for the main character? Like, what do you think about that stuff, man? I mean, it's just wild.
Gosh. So I've not deep dived into the topic of screen memories, but I do, I do think that the majority of the phenomenon is deceptive. And so therefore it's trying to hide what it is and what its intentions are. I think is if you accept the data, there's so much of it, then eventually you have to realize it seems to be trying to get us to look over here. So we don't look over here. It's like, we're extraterrestrials, we're trying to help you, blah, 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 would be the normal screen memory. Or maybe it's, I'm this divine being and we're coming to help you with this or whatever. Whereas actually in reality, the total cultural impact of the phenomenon maybe is what's purposefully being driven. Maybe it's designed to accentuate the religious tensions so that the planet doesn't unify or something. These are all speculations, but in that sense, I think a screen or multiple screens preventing us from understanding the real phenomena potentially is there. That would be a part of that whole mechanism. On the Spielberg film, I did see the trailer, and I must confess, having listened to you speak about it, I didn't look as closely as you did. I was more surprised because of the build-up and everyone getting in the UFO world, everyone got so excited about it. And then I watched the trailer and I thought, I don't know. I was just like, is this really going to be the breakthrough film?
I don't think so.
For some reason, I got it in my head that it was going to be a documentary. Yeah. So I was quite excited about that. I was like, Spielberg's making a documentary or some sort of art project around this. But for me, I was a bit like, oh, it's a film. And then I was very interested that the lady was speaking. She had some sort of like speech thing going on where non-human intelligence was communicating through her. So I'm interested.
Speaking soda can.
Yeah. It was kind of funky. But I think my general feeling at the moment has been following the Age of Disclosure, following John Bilch and Jake Barber coming out, following all of these things that we keep feeling are going to break through. I'm a little bit jaded about the next big thing and about UFO world always getting excited. Not that you are, by the way, but like that was my feeling as I watched it. I was a bit like, I bet everyone's going to be saying this will be the thing, which is me being very pessimistic. But tell me about this screen memory thing and what you were seeing there.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I think you're probably more correct. I don't think we're going to actually get disclosure from the movie. I think he's just calling it Disclosure Day, and the daily UFO YouTube channels who I watch. Yeah. They got to make their content, and they're like, this is what we have. This is the tweet. This is the X post, from the insider, and they got to make their content. Like, I get it. But just like with everything else we've talked about, you have to put these safeguards into place. So I agree. But I mean, the screen memory, I had the privilege of speaking with, I don't actually remember what Kathleen Marden said, who is Betty Hill's niece, but I also spoke with Yvonne Smith, who's a hypnotherapist and works with abductions. And that is a common thing. I mean, if you read John Mack's books as well, it's a common thing. Whether it's a deer with big black eyes, whether it's a mouse, a barn owl, some sort of animal. And John Mack was sort of theorizing, like, does this have to do more with the human imagination? A spirit animal type of thing, because shamans who have abduction experiences describe a similar sort of thing. Or is it on behalf of the perpetrator of the abductions to speak in a language we understand? I don't know, but it brings up a really interesting question. Like, on the one hand, like I did a video about Black Elk, the Lakota holy man, and he never explicitly said that he had a visit from the Star People. One of his extended family members did, Wallace Black Elk, which is overtly like a UFO experience, but he had experiences that fit with his own mythology. He had this cloud come down and grab his astral body and float him up into the sky, where he met the 6 grandfathers. And the 6 grandfathers gave him these tools, these spiritual tools, whether it's a pipe, a spear, a bow and arrow. And these were tools, and they were trying to tell him the things that were going to happen to the Lakota Nation, which did happen. Great, great tragedies, Wounded Knee. And so, if that is an authentic experience, I'm not saying it's a UFO experience, but if it's authentic, it's divine beings giving a message to humans. The question is there a screen memory going on there? I don't know. I find it really interesting that John Blitch had an experience right before his abduction. He has Lakota in his DNA, by the way, that he looked up with his neighbor and saw a big storm cloud directly over his house, but no other storm clouds around him.
That's so interesting.
And that was right before his abduction. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know. But trying to answer your question about the screen memory, at the very least, the definition seems to be a memory, like a befuddling of the memory that helps protect the person from a more distressing truth. So like, someone who's sexually abused at a very young age, their brain might have warped it just to help them not confront how traumatic that was.
Yeah, I see.
I don't know. But hey, man, do you want to say anything about that before my last little thing?
No, it just made me think about, there's some people theorize that UFO abductions themselves are screen memories sort of like revisiting the pain of coming out of, during the birth process and being surrounded by these doctors and these equipment on this room, like your very first primal memory where you're kind of going from the safety of the womb into this terrifying new world, that the UFO phenomena could in some way be a sort of a projection or re-experience of this. And I think, it's very interesting. I'm not sure it works. I haven't thought it through, but I was just thinking about that as you were saying that. These are all things we have to consider. And what's kind of crazy is like, at some point, the rug is going to be pulled out from all of us and the different things that we're believing. Like, who knows? Like, maybe we're going to realize, like, screen memories are controlling everything we think about the phenomenon. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, the layers of deception. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, okay. So I want to end with a couple of things. The first one is, what books are you reading right now? What books would you recommend people who want to get into this? Let's just start with that, and then we'll go to the last thing.
Yeah. So right now it's I constantly dig into the same books, the sort of reference books, whatever I'm looking into. But I'm working on 2 videos at the moment. One is about Dr. Ronald Pandolfi and the battle to prevent UFO disclosure. And so as part of that, I'm really just looking at like 40 different documents and places and all of that. So reading wise, like that takes up a lot of time. The other piece I'm working on is about the Collins elite and about this kind of conviction that there is an end time scenario playing out, that the biblical sort of prophecies are coming true, how this might connect to what's going on in the Middle East and the UFO phenomenon. And so as part of that, it's revisiting Nick Redfern's brilliant book on the Collins Elite. Like I'm reading it for the third time, but when you're going to make a video, you kind of have to really figure out which bits you want to read out. Exo Vaticana, which I mentioned. I read a book on angels recently. I don't know if I've got it here. And then also a lot of articles online about spiritual warfare in the Middle East. So, like former Iranian, I don't know if you call him the prime minister or the president, and his beliefs about this hidden NHI that he was in contact with whilst he was running the country. There's all these stories about Israel dropping talisman, like these symbols, whilst they were bombing Iran. So I'm just really trying to find examples of that, and then also been looking into any content related to the Temple Mount. So like, this location that seems so important. And there's this thing called the Well of Souls. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's this postulated cavity beneath. What might that mean? What might it mean for all of this ancient Jewish tradition about this place of like primordial energy beneath the Temple Mount? So I'm, as always, I'm not finishing any books. I'm just splicing across them all the time. So,
what's your angel book that you're reading? I'm curious.
It's actually, it's just called A Short Introduction to Angels. And it was just a great reminder of what the Bible teaches about angels in a really nice light format, because, I'm always really complimented by people who see me as reading a lot. The truth is I'm terrible at reading. I'm always distracted, and I will read the shortest books possible or just a chapter of a book, because it's really hard. So like A Short Introduction to Angels, part of me was like, I should really buy the big meaty one. It's like, no, Jason, you're never going to finish it. Just read the small one. Come on.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Or those books like by super intellectual people where the chapters are like a book each, like the Celtic fairy book. It was like a book each chapter. I'm like, bro, I can't, my ADHD brain can't do that. Yeah. But hey man, Jason, it has been an absolute pleasure. I congratulate you on your success and your channel, and I hope it only continues to grow. I think you're asking the right questions. Unlike a lot of people out there, you're actually trying to make some sort of thesis or conclusion with the evidence that we have, instead of just reporting it. I think that's a step further. It's a step up. And so I really appreciate you, man. Where can people find you if they're interested?
Yeah, I'm on YouTube, Jason Samosa. If you search that now, it actually comes up with my stuff. Previously, you would get weird videos about Jason Momoa in the shape of a samosa. That age seems to have passed. So I think you can just search.
Graduated from the Momoa.
We have now moved on. But if you're still seeing weird Jason Momoa hybrids, just add UFO onto the end. You'll find me. And I'm also on X as well. It's just X is useful to share stuff. And I have on Patreon, some of my stuff is free. Like right now, there's a free extra video on there on Patreon. So if you need an extra fix, if you go through all the videos, there's some stuff there. And but easiest to contact is on X if you want to shoot a question over or whatever.
Hell yeah, man. Well, thank you so much, Jason. Appreciate it.
Yeah, cool. JP, it's been awesome. Good luck with launching all of this and your new podcast and everything. And looking forward to speaking again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, man.